They said the bumblebee see a ant fly, but it did.
You know, there's that old story you've probably heard a million times, that scientifically bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly. But what if that story was never really about the bee at all? What if it's about us? Today we're going to dive into what's called the Bumblebee Theory, an idea that shows us the limits of our own thinking and the incredible potential that's waiting just beyond them. Right? It's one of those classic little fun facts, isn't it? A piece of trivia that feels like a glitch in the system. The idea that this little creature, which is so perfectly made for flying, is somehow breaking all the laws of science. But is that what's really happening here? Well, to really get it, we have to go back. We have to look at where this famous scientific myth even came from. And you'll see, it's a story not so much about the failure of a bee, but about a failure in our own understanding. Okay, so picture this. It's the 1930s. Some really brilliant physicists decide they're going to figure out the bumblebee. But they ran into a bit of a problem. See, the only math they had for flight was all designed for airplanes. You know, things with huge, rigid wings that just slice neatly through the air. So when they took those formulas and tried to apply them to the bee's tiny, buzzing, frantic wings, the math just fell apart. It didn't work. The only conclusion they could come to was that, according to their models, the bee's flight was totally impossible. So where did their thinking go so wrong? Well, those early equations made three really big and really wrong assumptions. First, they assumed the air flowed over the wings all smooth and predictable, kinda like it does with the glider. Second, they treated the wings like they were just stiff little planks. And third, they assumed the whole thing was simple and linear. But a bumblebee's flight is none of those things, not even close. And this, right here, brings us to the real lesson of the story. The paradox was never about some magical bee that could defy the laws of physics. Nope. It was about our physics not being smart enough yet to describe the bee. It was a failure of our imagination. And that's the absolute crucial point. Nature was never wrong. The bee was flying around just fine, thank you very much. It was our human-made model, our equations on a chalkboard, that was incomplete. It just couldn't capture the beautiful, messy complexity of the real world. I mean, just look at this comparison. It shows the gap perfectly. The old theory assumed rigid wings. But in reality, a bee's wings rotate, they vibrate, they even change direction in the middle of a flap. The old theory needed steady, smooth airflow. But what does the bee do? It creates chaos. It makes these tiny, unstable whirlpools of air, they're called vortices, that generate an incredible amount of lift. It's this dynamic, messy dance, not some simple, clean equation. This really gets to the core of the scientific lesson here. We just can't expect the universe to fit perfectly into these neat little boxes we build for it. When our theories don't match up with what we can see with our own eyes, it's not reality that's broken, it's our theory. The problem was never, ever the creature, it was our model. But, this isn't just a cool lesson about bees and physics. This simple story, it turns into this really powerful metaphor, one that helps us understand the limits of our knowledge in pretty much every part of our lives. Philosophers of science actually have a name for this. They call it epistemic humility. It sounds kind of fancy, but it's a really simple, profound idea. It's knowing that what you know is not all there is to know. Our theories, our models, they're just snapshots of reality. They're not the whole movie. And the bumblebee? It's the perfect mascot for this idea. And if you look at it from a theological angle, the metaphor gets even deeper. The bee's flight becomes the symbol of a kind of wisdom that's baked into creation, something that goes way beyond our ability to just break it down into simple formulas. It kind of hints that some mysteries aren't just problems we haven't solved yet, but maybe a higher, more complex logic than our tools can even measure.
And this same exact principle applies directly to how we organize our societies. When countries or institutions get too hung up on rigid models of how the world should work, they totally fail to adapt to how it actually works. Just like those old flight equations failed the bee.
The most resilient, the most successful systems, whether you're talking about law or economics or politics, they're the ones that act like the bumblebee. They're flexible. They're constantly adjusting to whatever's happening around them. They actually thrive in turbulence because they aren't built on some fragile, rigid set of rules. They're dynamic. I mean, think about it.
Even something as old as the church, according to this theory, it survives and grows not because of its unbending rules, but because it has this capacity for grace, for improvisation, for responding to what's called the unsteady movements of the spirit, things a simple sociological model could never, ever predict or even account for.
So, okay, if this is true for science and it's true for society, what in the world does it mean for us, for you and me? This is where the Bumblebee Theory stops being an abstract idea and becomes a really powerful tool for understanding our own potential. This right here is the heart of it. Every single one of us has been measured by someone else's model, by the expectations of our family, of society, even of ourselves. This theory says those models are not your reality. They are just someone else's limited, incomplete formula for who you are.
All those labels people put on you, the limits you were told you had, the little boxes you were forced into, what are they? They're nothing more than the 1930s fixed-wing aircraft equations. They are an inadequate, outdated model that totally fails to capture the dynamic, complex, and resilient reality of who you truly are and what you're capable of.
So what do we take away from all this? Let's break it down. First, humility. Be willing to admit that our maps of the world aren't the actual world. Second, hope. Just because something seems impossible by one set of rules doesn't mean it is. Third, creativity. Being flexible, being adaptive, that's always going to be stronger than being rigid. And finally, faith. Just being open to the idea that there's a deeper logic at work than the one we can see on the surface.
And that brings us right to the core of it all. Yeah, we started with a bumblebee, but this was never just a lesson in zoology. It's a parable. It's a story about the profound inadequacy of our own assumptions and the incredible, amazing potential that lies just on the other side of them.
So the next time you feel limited by an old story or by someone else's expectation, I want you to remember the bumblebee. Remember that the formulas being used to measure you might just be totally flawed. And remember that you too can soar, especially when the equations say you cannot.